Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Sabahat.
Hi, Shandana. How are you?
बिल्कुल ठीक. How are you?
बिल्कुल ठीक अल्लाह का शुक्र.
Thank you so much for making time for me. I really appreciate it. I'm a fan. I have been since you started posting your videos.
Mm-hmm. Thank
For
you very
those
much.
listening, Sabahat Zakariya is the writer and cultural critic formerly known as the Feminustani. I say formerly, Sabahat, because as of this morning, your YouTube channel was called the Ostani, and you've split
Yes.
your content into the Feministani and the Tarikustani now. So thank you very much for forcing me to ditch 99% of my research at the last minute.
Yeah, that's just something that I've been thinking about a lot because each time I tell somebody who doesn't know about Feministani at all that this is what my channel is called, they sort of assume that it is about feminist content, which it was about for a considerable period of time. But since it has branched out into so much more now, I feel perhaps a name change is warranted just for the confusion to be a little less.
I think that makes abundant sense, and I would agree with that.
Mhm.
Your content is not just feminist content. And I think some of your most valuable early work for me, anyway, was about a cultural history of Pakistan, for example.
Mhm.
Do you think that your decision to rebrand was in any way impacted by how people react to women speaking about things like history or politics?
Uh, I wouldn't say the rebranding is necessarily about that, but most definitely people do react a certain way to women talking about history and politics or anything that is generally not deemed women's domain.
Hmm.
In this particular case, I would say it was honestly more about the fact that perhaps I felt it did not reflect the channel's diversity, but that was really the reason behind the rebrand. But about people not expecting it from women, oh, absolutely. And the kind of responses I generally get, and all of that, that's something. Yeah, that's another topic.
And it's very frustrating because it's almost as if when we are speaking about politics or history, a
Hmm.
lot of people in Pakistan just either can't hear us as if they don't operate on that frequency,
Hmm.
or I don't know if they can't hear us or if it's deliberate kind of misogyny. I'm torn.
Okay, but my question is that, are there that many women in this space to begin with? And I've also questioned that fact because, I look at Instagram and I do see where women generally tend to be. And I understand the systemic, let's say, reasons and all of that. But I also kind of, question the women's participation in it to begin with. I find myself in a lonely space, to be honest. So, so yeah, I mean, yes, there are obviously the responses from the other party, but then my question is, what are we doing, or are we doing enough to push back? Mm-hmm.
Most recently, using the Feministani platform, you've
Mm-hmm.
been mining Pakistani popular culture for what you call feminist and social critique.
Mm-hmm.
But your engagement with Pakistani culture and identity formation significantly predates that.
Mm-hmm.
So, before you left Pakistan about 5 years ago, you were a journalist and editor with experience across media forms, and you had
Mm-hmm.
similar thematic preoccupations, right?
True.
But traditional media, mein to khair, there are certain styles and tones one must conform to.
Mm-hmm.
But now that you are your own boss, you've
Mm-hmm.
established a very distinctive one of your own, one
Mm-hmm.
that is very well described by your term midbrow. Can you
Mm-hmm.
tell me what midbrow means?
Right. Yes, I think midbrow is something I'm particularly invested in, and I really, really care about because, as you pointed out, my earlier iterations have been about print media, about writing in the English press in Pakistan, etc. Because of which I have come across a lot of people who operate in that domain, people who write in English in Pakistan or outside of it, but like related to Pakistan. And I also came across a lot of people who were interested in literary writing. And a lot of them, unfortunately, also seem to me like terrible bores and extremely arrogant at times and things like that. So it's general observation that I may have noticed amongst academics, let's say, or academics who write. And and I always did not feel comfortable in that sort of not just environment, but also when I read some Pakistani authors who consider themselves to be possibly highbrow, I am just bored by it. And so there was that perhaps that I've always thought about. And then there's obviously, whatever we call the lowbrow, which would perhaps be maybe something that is not just slapstick but also even beyond that. I mean, something that is off color, let's say. Again, I mean, all of
Hmm.
these definitions are very much also tied in with class or whatever. So I mean, I'm a little reluctant to just generalize, but
Hmm.
whatever is perceived that way. So I would say that for me, midbrow is something that is mainstreamish, that people will be able to grasp immediately, at least, if not immediately, then at least, fairly. And but something that can be entertaining but can also be deep. Well, let's say that. So I mean, that's my own understanding of midbrow. I don't know if this definition is even much in use anywhere. It's just something I feel like almost like I have invented in my head. But
Hmm.
yeah, for me, to be able to get out of that space where there is some sort of snobbery attached to the imparting of knowledge or creativity or art. But in fact, I feel like being popular is great. Being able to reach out to a large number of people is great. So yeah, so for me, midbrow kind of defines that space where you can actually talk to people who may not necessarily be in your sphere, but who may have curiosity or inclinations that perhaps have not been cultivated, because some certain people thought that there needs to be some kind of ivory tower, or this needs to be some kind of special space for the intellectual kinds.
Would you say that your recent short, Indians from Pakistan, is a good example of the midbrow category?
I hope so. Yes, I hope everything I do is. But yes, absolutely. For instance, I feel like this idea of somehow being able to explain or bring home to people the reality of life in a subcontinent that was not what it is today, to try to drive home the fact that in my city, Lahore, Hindus were as much a part of cultural life as any other religion or ethnicity or whatever. I mean, how diverse things were within the areas that are now Pakistan, and how much of that diversity has been lost. I think that talking about Bollywood stars or politicians or cricketers, I mean, these are people that we immediately relate with, or at least know. I think
Hmm.
celebrities or famous people, yeah, they are entertainment, as we call it. I mean, it's a great way of being able to explain something that is not necessarily about entertainment. That to
Hmm.
me is like one of the things most definitely that Feminustani has always done, which is to, like, take things that are popular, which is sort of like entertainment, etc., and from there go into areas like history, to make a point that perhaps purely academic history might not, I mean, would make, but would make in a less accessible way.
Hmm. That's why your first post as a Tariqistani or Tariqustani?
Tarikhustani.
Tariqustani.
Yes.
Tariqustani also
Yes.
focuses on India and Pakistan. Acha, so since you are clearly very interested in identity formation and
Hmm.
identity flux, let
Right.
me ask you, what do you think is the difference between a Pakistani and an overseas Pakistani?
Right. So it's very, very strange to me that, I mean, I should even be asked this question, considering how long I have not been an overseas Pakistani, how long
Hmm.
I've actually actively sort of defined myself in opposition to overseas Pakistanis, I would say.
Hmm.
Or even, a category I talk about frequently on my Twitter and get a lot of hate for, from what I would call my own kind, which is like burgers.
Hmm.
Because I kind of tend to define myself against people who are, uh, in actuality, perhaps the people I do come from or belong to in so many ways, I feel like overseas Pakistani is another of one of those categories now that I am one. Um, I I think that, if I think from my Pakistani brain, the person who's lived in Pakistan all her life, I feel like there's not there's not much that you can really carry over, obviously beyond a generation. So if you are an overseas Pakistani, you're cut off from reality, I would say, or even any real way in which you can impact that geography. Like being cut off from geography is a big deal. So it's a very strange place to be in.
Mm.
Being this overseas Pakistani who is now, if you're a creative overseas, you're talking to it now, and like, how are you going to talk to them? And that obviously, in my case, I continue to talk to Pakistan in the same way I was while I was doing Feminustani in Pakistan. I mean, I was there in Pakistan for like 4 years of Feminustani.
Mm.
So, but for that, it means that I have to consider my work on Feminustani as something that does not get me money. That's not a career in terms of finances, whatever. Because I am continuing to talk to Pakistan alone, because that's what I want to do. I'm continuing to talk in Urdu only. I'm continuing to talk about topics that don't have an overseas resonance. I do not show my overseas life. I mean, I do have a platform. Maybe I could, but I don't. I don't talk about that.
Mm.
So I don't know. I feel like it's just such a losing game. Like, either you stay there if you are going to actually want to change things there, but you can't, because if you do, then you feel like even your life could be in danger. But then, when you're here, you are in a way inauthentic. So I am now kind of stuck in that world, in that zone. um but that's, I guess, not something very new to me. I mean, this sense of not belonging anywhere, which is like to that cliche that obviously all overseas Pakistanis talk about. And I'm not talking about purely in terms of geography. I don't belong anywhere, like, I feel, in any shape or form. So yeah.
I completely hear you. I'm in a similar situation. And the thing
Yeah.
is that I haven't been gone long enough to forget what it was like to see an overseas
Right.
Pakistani,
Right.
right? So
Exactly.
it's an interesting tension to exist with. और फिर उसके ऊपर एक और भी tension है, and that is what is the difference between an overseas Pakistani and a diasporic Pakistani? इस
Right.
सवाल का जवाब दें आप जरा.
अभी तो मेरे ख्याल आपने भी मुझे बताया था, और मेरे केस में भी यही है कि क्योंकि अभी ग्रीन पासपोर्ट है, तो अभी तो ओवरसीज वाला ही है, काम आसान है। अभी वो कनेक्शन भी प्रूव करना मुझे, कोई कुछ, somebody says something to me on Twitter, um
Hmm.
I'll always respond with, I mean, at least I have that knowledge within me that I'm technically still a Pakistani citizen. But once that also goes away, you know, does your relationship or your ability to talk about it become even more tenuous? I don't know.
Wow. So that was not the answer I was expecting, and that's not something I've actually even ever thought of. The fact that one
Mm-hmm.
still has a green passport makes you overseas versus diasporic, because I thought it was about class.
Mm, okay.
I thought कि वो posh वाले लोग diasporic कहते हैं और normal लोग overseas कहते
Okay,
हैं.
that's a good one. Because you
But
see, जो
हाँ.
UK US में है, वो तो वैसे भी they're on a path of citizenship. मगर जो यूएई में है, सऊदी अरब में है, वो एक अलग किस्म की ओवरसीज पाकिस्तानियत है कि
Hmm.
you're not going to get most in most cases you're not going to get citizenship of those places, and you are going to go back to Pakistan. So but those are not usually the people who seem to be in the creative space either. Some of them
Hmm.
are, but yeah. So I think there are those things, like, because definitions are created by people who are going to write or talk or create something, I guess.
People who work with language end up
Mhm.
having a disproportionate amount of attention paid to
Right.
their opinions.
Right. Yeah.
And they actually, that's not necessarily a good thing. But I was
Hmm.
actually hoping that you would say class in answer to that question. But thank you for making me think that. So I wanted to talk to you about class because of
Mm-hmm.
your take on the recent drama serial Kabhi Main Kabhi Tum,
Mm-hmm.
whose lead Tanya Amir recently poked an entirely different bear,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and which is where your Indians from Pakistan short came from. But in
Mm-hmm.
your critique of Kabhi Main Kabhi Tum, you talked about how relationship building is always middle class to elite relationship building,
Mm-hmm.
never middle class to uneducated Gharib relationship building. This
Mm-hmm.
made me wonder, how high exactly are your expectations of a drama serial?
Very high. I don't
हाँ
see
लग रहा है.
any reason. Yeah, I don't see any reason why these Pakistani dramas cannot be good. Like I I am from a time, I guess it really is about age. I am from a time when I did not see Pakistan or production from Pakistan to be naturally inferior to anything anywhere else.
Hmm.
And I just cannot understand this acceptance of the fact that, Pakistani drama can only be this and that can't be more. And obviously, I don't watch a lot of it at all, and I don't watch it not a lot. I don't watch it at all, except for when something gets really big and somebody keeps telling me, please watch it. And, and then I think, like, just for the zeitgeist, because I do have this whole kira of wanting to know everything about Pakistan. So,
Hmm.
so there's that, like, sort of contradiction that's always at work, because uh, Pakistan seems to be obsessed with Pakistani drama. So I'm like, okay, I should watch at least a few every year, just to be able to hate on them, right, at least, so that at least I know, if I am hating on them, I'm not hating on them, because based on ignorance, I actually know what I'm talking about. So yeah, so in this particular case, I do have high expectations. Absolutely, I don't see why, when these channels are so profitable now, that they
Hmm.
cannot possibly create things that are actually decent. I mean, they have, again, India is a great example. You have so much. I mean, at a larger level, I'm not saying India produces great things every day, but at least, let's say over a decade or so, you can come up with 15 things or 20 or 50 even, perhaps, that are actually good. Then what
Hmm.
is wrong with us, and why can't we? And I somehow cannot digest or accept the fact that we can't. Although, there's another part of me that says, oh, these are the reasons why we can't and why India can. But um but I still find it, maybe my mind understands, but my heart is having a hard time catching up with it.
Yeah. That,
But I also feel like it is still possible. Like, why is it not happening? um I don't know.
do
I
you think it
really,
used to
really feel
happen?
that.
when
I
when
think
you
it
say
used
you
to
have a high
happen.
bar, can you give me
Hmm.
examples of what you think
Yeah.
set the bar
So
for
I would
you?
say that, sure. So I would say that growing up, okay, so for me at least, um I think the best example of perhaps midbrow in the 80s is Hasina Moin. And I
Hmm.
think those Hasina Moin dramas are definitely something that, are watchable till date.
Hmm.
And because of, you know, me having seen them as a child, then having read stuff like Ishtiyaq Ahmed, who was a novelist in Urdu when we were kids,
Hmm.
who turned into a rabid Islamist
Yeah.
at some point. Yes, but prior to that, or even after he did, he knew how to write a story that could grip you. So
Hmm.
as children, we were reading these novels, and he was producing them at sort of lightning speed. He was writing like 4 novels a month, and at one
Wow.
point, yes.
Excuse me, I
And
have to go live an entirely different life now. I'll be back in about
yeah,
150
I
years
know.
as
So
an
it was
ant.
just like, yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, I would say the fact that he could actually write something that made you want to keep reading from page 1 to 100, whatever, without stopping. But it was purely being created from within. It felt like very organically, you know, Pakistani or whatever it may be at that point in time. Again, notwithstanding what he turned into. Um, but yeah, so I would say that. I would say even other things that we saw on PTV, which at that point in time, the initial again, so maybe it's quite possible that all of this for me is tinged with nostalgia of a time when I was young, and therefore, everything is good when you were young. But
Mm.
I do think that objectively too, even when I revisit some of these things may not pass, some of them may not pass muster today, but some of them do. And when they do, I feel like, okay, does did my child grow up with any of this in Pakistan? And he didn't.
Mm.
So I feel like there's a lot of loss of good organic creativity. Everybody just like, somebody who can today express themselves seems to be only able to express themselves, let's say in a sort of deeper way, seems to gravitate to English.
Mm.
And I'm talking about, mainstream again, more, mainstream TV or writing that everyday children were able to access, which were about Pakistan in a language that, for better or for worse, is a Pakistani language or the Pakistani language. And it felt homegrown. But when I read stuff written in English, obviously I like many of those things too, and I
Mm.
don't consider them invalid or not Pakistani or anything. But I do feel that they need to be augmented with a lot of stuff that is being created in local languages. They cannot be the only thing that a young Pakistani can turn to for Pakistani literature or Pakistani representation.
तो ये आपने इतनी
So
सारी बातें छेड़ दी हैं एकदम, तो आई डोंट नो कि मैं कहाँ
I
से
know
शुरू
it
करूँ।
goes all over.
हाँ, हालांकि आपको जवाब देने, लेकिन इस वक्त मेरा मूड हो रहा है कि मैं जरा आपको बताऊं।
बिल्कुल, ये मैंने आपके तार बहुत ज्यादा छेड़ दिए।
हाँ। So, let me start at the beginning if before we continue, because I really want you to continue what you were saying. But I think before we get there, we should, because everybody's brain does not work as fast as yours, Sabahat, let's give them some breathing room. ठीक है? So let's start with what you said about nostalgia, because
Mhm,
I had a chat with a friend who is a stalwart of the Pakistani TV and film
mhm,
industry yesterday, knowing that
mhm,
I was speaking to you, and I was asking
mhm,
them about, and I'm going to let this source remain anonymous. I was
sure.
asking them about the state of Pakistani dramas, and
Mhm,
I also gave them the example of Hasina Moin, because मैं आपसे सिर्फ
mhm,
3 साल बड़ी हूँ, by the way.
ठीक है।
हाँ, तो मैंने भी उनको हसीना मोइन का एग्जांपल दिया, और
Mhm,
they said that you're mistaking nostalgia for quality.
right.
And Antahi and Tanhaiya were never that good. Khuda Ki
Mhm,
Basti and Teesra Kinara, yes, which by the way
mhm,
were also adaptations of books.
yeah.
Khuda Ki Basti by
Mhm,
Shaukat Siddiqui
yep.
and The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. So
Mhm,
I think
mhm,
Rahul Kazmi साहब ने खुद ही I think adapt किया था, right?
जी बिल्कुल।
हाँ. So yeah, so clearly there is a history of adaptations of books, for example,
Mhm,
right?
mhm, yep.
This the drama that we started talking about was also by Farhat Ishtiyaq,
Mhm,
and some of the biggest hits in recent Pakistani
mhm,
TV have been
mhm,
based on the work of Farhat Ishtiyaq.
yep.
Hamzafar, I think, Bin Roy as
Yes.
well,
Mhm,
or भी I think
yeah, ये जो
और भी
कभी है
एक दो
कभी गम।
हाँ, एक दो
Mhm,
और भी writers हैं,
mhm,
खवातीन,
mhm.
who are very popular.
उमैर अहमद, yeah.
Is it that so nothing has changed except for our reaction to Pakistani dramas?
No, I don't agree with that at all. Not at all. I mean, there's no similarity between Hasina Muin and Umair Ahmad or Farhat Ishtiyaq. None
Hmm.
whatsoever. That means you do not fundamentally misunderstand all of them.
No,
Um,
but is it not simply an accurate reflection of contemporary society? Because this is what people
mm,
are reading and this is what people are responding to. So, is it possible that we are out of step with contemporary
no,
Pakistani society in our,
no.
or,
I think that we, or I don't, when I say we, I certainly don't mean myself or you. I mean
hmm.
Pakistan as a whole. Um,
Because
that
these dramas are
or
super popular. That's why they're
Yeah,
getting the advertising.
sure, they are super popular, but then these dramas and what they talk about, and the worldview and just world building, this was all present uh, in the 1980s. Again, because I can only speak for the 1980s and beyond. So I'm sure they were also existing prior to that, but for sure, they are just basically digests, women's digests come to life and come to
Yeah.
TV.
And
And that's,
digests have massive readerships, much
yeah,
bigger than English
exactly. So
language,
they
Urdu
always
language,
had
and everything
massive
put together.
readership.
Huh.
Yeah, exactly. They always had massive readership, but television did not focus on, only digest kind of writing. Fatima Suraya Bajia was emblematic to me of that
Hmm.
digest kind of writing on PTV, but
Hmm.
Hasina Muin was not. Hasina Muin was actually clearly more influenced by Western writing, right?
Hmm.
She is somebody who is bringing the sensibility of Jane Austen and stuff to this kind of Urdu writing, and
Hmm.
so she has influences from both directions, and she's bringing them together beautifully. But Fatma Suraya Bajia and maybe older woman or whatever it may be, everybody has different leanings or ways of being a writer or whatever. So I would say the strand we're watching today is a continuation of the Bajia strand or the Women's Digest strand, and that has just taken over everything. Because yeah, I mean, it is kind of, and I will say it because unfortunately, I mean, I have that issue. I feel like it's important to say these things. I would say that they are catering to the lowest common denominator, and it
Hmm.
was it is always going to be easier to capture and also bring people down to that. For me, an example of this is that my mother,
Hmm.
who is a very interesting figure in the sense that she's always been very interested in art and culture and things like that. Um, I have seen in front of my eyes, I have seen her taste deteriorate. And
Hmm.
and it's all thanks to Pakistani drama. And so if it can happen to her, it's clearly happened to larger society as well. Like these same people were watching PTV. PTV
Hmm.
was also very popular, and all of the um tales about traffic stopping when Varis aired, or
Hmm.
any of the big dramas aired or whatever. So obviously people cared about that stuff, which was different, which was not this way, which was not necessarily aimed at the lowest common denominator. Wasn't Kasauti a popular show?
Hmm.
Wasn't let's say even now, although at that time it was considered to be sort of um, let's say maybe mid brow or low brow ish.
Hmm.
Tariq Aziz, the Nilamgar, the Tariq Aziz show. I mean, those things were also popular, but they at least attempted to incorporate some um, cerebral aspects of Pakistaniness into mainstream culture. But these people have just gone ahead and run and sort of ran away with all of this, and now we claim that this is all that people want. But we haven't created anything alternate on a larger scale. And I
Okay.
understand maybe it's going to be less popular comparatively, but there are again examples on social media. For me, the biggest example of which is Faisal Varaich. I don't know if you're
Hmm.
familiar with his work. And if somebody can of like Faisal Varaich can get millions of views and
Hmm.
subscribers, then why can't Hum TV, you know, invest in something like a countrywide quiz show, or even forget fiction for a second, anything else that was part of our mainstream heritage by PTV. Why is all of it dead? I mean,
Yeah. No, I listen,
it's a
I
lack
hear
of
you.
imagination.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think
Mhm.
that again, listening to you, I am struck by what I think is quite common
Mhm.
in Pakistanis, which is that we have a very fluid the lines between a state identity building project
Mm.
and our own desires are actually very fluid, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're almost a bit that whole concept of enlightened moderation
Mm-hmm.
and propaganda isn't always bad, because it seems to me,
Mm-hmm.
one could argue that that is what you're saying, कि हमने अपनी
Right.
identity शुरू से बनानी है because हमें अब कोई और घास नहीं डालता, तो we have to invest in this
I
ourselves.
know what you're saying.
And
नहीं तो
yeah.
यार नेशन स्टेट आइडेंटिटी बिल्डिंग प्रोजेक्ट तो है ही ना, और पाकिस्तान तो पर्टिकुलरली अब उसका कुछ जब आप बना ही उसको स्क्रैच से रहे हैं, तो
Hmm.
बहरहाल वो तो you cannot deny the fact that it is like what else is it, in the sense that even in this कोई ना कोई डायरेक्शन तो कोई जो भी बड़ा कह लें प्लेटफॉर्म है वो आपको अब इस वक्त तो खैर दुनिया जो है वो इतनी तितर बितर है, देयर इज
Hmm.
नो वन प्लेटफॉर्म एनी लॉन्गर. आई मीन PTV could have been that nation building, or was that nation building
Hmm.
project के लिए एक बहुत एग्जैक्ट जगह जहाँ पे वो पॉसिबल था, लेकिन अब तो इट्स नॉट पॉसिबल in any
Yeah.
large scale way. Even if let's say Pakistani dramas are so popular, but don't you know, like that हमारी पॉपुलेशन क्या है, और उस हिसाब से अगर आप पाकिस्तानी ड्रामास की व्यूअरशिप देखें तो क्या है, कुछ भी नहीं है अब फिर भी. तो
Yeah.
वो so I mean we don't know कि वो एक्चुअली में उसकी पेनिट्रेशन, मैं हजारों लोग ऐसे मैं जानती हूँ जो कि ये मेरे से एग्री करते हैं कि बहुत बकवास है. So
Hmm.
so the point is that yeah, I mean, I also want to know a bit more in terms of what you mean when you say that, because I feel कि कहीं से तो कोई ना कोई direction. I don't have a very completely sort of let's say anarchist approach to this. I do feel
Hmm.
that yeah, there are people who um for lack of a better word, sort of direct or guide or lead people into thinking in certain ways, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do not
Hmm.
have that sort of leftist understanding of the world. Let's say maybe if it is indeed leftist, where you feel almost guilty about shaping minds. I don't think there's anything wrong with shaping minds.
No, there's nothing wrong with shaping minds, but there's
Mhm.
absolutely nothing wrong with shaping minds. And I'm going to share something with you about one of my favorite possessions in a second related to that. But
Mhm.
before we move on to that, my source in the industry also said something else to me, which I thought I would
Mhm.
is worth thinking about. They
Mhm.
said that, did you know that streaming services
Mhm.
now tell writers and directors to include more exposition, because
Oh.
the way in which people watch series and serials has
Mhm.
changed. So
Mhm.
there's no longer room for your
Mm.
silent visual, which often
Okay.
is the bits
Right.
which convey nuance,
Exactly.
etc. Because
Mhm.
so the medium has shaped the message. They said you got to keep that in mind when you're talking about why there's such a rush towards mediocrity in
Right.
terms of
तो
drama creation from a screenwriting perspective.
बिल्कुल ठीक. वो तो जाहिर है कि वो इंडस्ट्री में हैं, वो फील्ड में हैं. He or
Hmm.
she or they can talk about things from a practical perspective. I I am not a practical person whatsoever. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I were.
Hmm.
I am an utter idealist, and I feel कि I mean अगर उस तरह से देखा जाए तो Feminustani itself, yeah, it has views, but it doesn't have like some like crazy number of views or anything. So
Hmm.
I mean I can also question कि अगर मैं ये यूं करना शुरू कर दूं तो मैं बढ़ा सकती हूँ अपने views. लेकिन the question is that do you want to do it by compromising on quality or depth? So no, and therefore no, तो फिर ठीक है, फिर जितने हैं उतने ही काफी हैं. So आप सवाल तो ये ना कि आपने सिर्फ बेचनी है चीज या आपने कुछ अच्छा बनाना है. तो हाँ, ऑब्वियसली देयर इज ऑलवेज दैट क्वेश्चन कि फिर पैसे कैसे बनाने हैं वगैरह. तो मेरा उसका जवाब ये है कि
Yeah.
मैं यहाँ पे I will do a part time job somewhere. I would rather stand at a Dunkin' Donuts than sell my soul. But that
Yeah.
obviously is a ridiculous sort of answer for most people. They won't do it. उनकी कुछ मेरी कुछ लेवल ऑफ प्रिविलेज जिसकी वजह से मैं ये कह सकती हूँ, किसी और की शायद ना हो, और जिनकी होती भी है उनकी ये सोच नहीं होती. So I understand, but like some five idealists in the world have to behave in an idealistic way at least. And I
Yeah,
feel like
बिल्कुल.
creative अगर आप हैं अपने आप को कहते, तो आप सिर्फ ये नहीं कह सकते कि लोग ये देखना चाहते हैं, आप वो एक्सपोजिशन के बगैर नहीं भाई, वो भी लोग हैं. There's that guy, वो क्या उसका नाम है यार, what an amazing Indian director,
कौन?
Chaitanya Tamhane. He has made these two films, The Disciple and Court. क्या
अच्छा.
मतलब कमाल, यानी कि he doesn't give an F कि कोई जो है वो देखना चाहता नहीं, लेकिन खूबसूरत बनाई. ये नहीं है कि मैं कहूँ कि यहाँ सिर्फ सिर्फ कूलनेस मारने की कोशिश कर रहा है और तो कुछ. नो, इट एक्चुअली इज गुड, right? It is genuinely something that you can feel that comes from the depths of somebody's soul and connects
Hmm.
with you in exactly the same way. Magar is no way is he trying to appeal to, in no way is he trying to appeal to the mainstream. So but he um I know a lot of people who can appreciate that work. So yeah, I
Yeah.
don't understand, I don't agree with these excuses. I feel like when you are making so much that is selling, right, then you have the surplus to be able to create things that may not sell in those ways. I mean, at least have some desire for creativity. I don't think they do.
I think that most people who work in the industry, a lot of them, of course, they have a desire for creativity. Nobody
Mhm.
becomes a screenwriter or a director thinking, "मैं बड़ी होके mediocre काम करूँगी," right?
When
Everyone
I say they,
once
honestly, I
aspires
mean
to.
the channel owners, I mean, obviously.
Yeah, I mean the channel owners, of course. Have you seen Joyland?
I have.
And what were your thoughts on Joyland?
Okay.
Speaking of,
Yeah,
being a dreamer and an idealist.
yeah, I don't know. I'm not, because my thoughts on Joyland are not. Uh, it's hard to explain. When I saw Joyland, I actually liked it, but when I thought about it afterwards, I really did feel that it is one of those things that a lot of Pakistani, again for the lack of a better word, a lot of people get antagonized by this word. I'm really sorry, but burger, kids, what are you doing? Like, your aim is, it's so obvious that your aim is some film festival. And when it becomes that obvious, the thing is, okay, with Joyland and with anything that, Pakistan creates sort of in an alt space, I
Hmm.
always feel that Pakistanis just do not have the immersion in their own land and in their own people, because we live in such gated mental spaces, not just gated communities, that, we want to talk about the ordinary Pakistani, but we don't know the ordinary Pakistani, or whatever the ordinary Pakistani
What's
is.
an ordinary
Why?
Pakistani for you?
Yeah, exactly. Whatever it is. My thing is that for Joyland people, that
Hmm.
ordinary Pakistani was somebody in Androon Share, right? Although they don't live in the Androon Share, they clearly don't know anything about the Androon Share. But it's a space they want to be in to prove themselves, um, to be the ordinary Pakistani. They will not set their movies in spaces that they know. They will not critique their own spaces, but they will enter into this sort of like separate space that they are looking at from foreign eyes, and also going to send it to foreign eyes. And all of their ecosystem is just not about the person in Pakistan. And that is my problem with ventures like Joyland and, like, things like that. For me, it's like, the accents are wrong, the clothes are wrong. Um, but even if even if we say they were right, even let's say they were right, I
Hmm.
still think, you can tell that from within the story itself, that this story is not this person's story who's telling this story. And they will not tell their own stories because they're too afraid, perhaps. I don't know. Because that actually requires much greater creative courage. Uh, I personally don't care for English writing about, like, people who these people will only again view from outside eyes. And I didn't
Hmm.
appreciate Joyland because of that fact. Because I could. there were so many ways in which I could see that this is an attempt at Pakistaning, that they think is um, valuable, basically because they are talking about some society that thing is the actual Pakistan. But
Got
yeah,
it.
I mean, yeah,
Hmm. So, I love Joyland. I thought it was
yeah.
brilliant.
Hmm.
I also appreciate what you're saying, and I think I know where you're coming from. For
Hmm.
someone like me who is a professional storyteller, I judge
Hmm.
a story on whether the story has an interior logic that it stays true to, right? One creates the
Right.
world of a story, and as long as
Good.
that world is seamless, I don't have a problem with it.
I would
And
say that even
yeah,
those aspects I didn't feel worked for me.
well, yeah, so again, it's all of this at the end of the day is completely
It's subjective.
subjective. And the world and the idea of Pakistaniyat is big enough to incorporate my opinion and your opinion and the opinion of, about hundreds of millions of other people. So it's perfectly okay.
Because
But
yeah,
I think
as long as, but
huh,
art needs to, the problem, I I I agree with you completely. But from the storytelling perspective too, I feel art has to be authentic, right? To appeal.
मैम
If
आप हर दो
authenticity,
जुमले की कोई और बात छेड़नी है और मैं सोच रही हूँ मैं अब इस पे शुरू करूँ अच्छा मत
authenticity के
बोलें हाँ
बगैर तो आर्ट नहीं है।
हाँ
चलिए ठीक है,
हाँ
नहीं जाती हूँ।
ऑथेंटिसिटी की आपने बात अब छेड़ दी चलें बोलें आप
Yeah.
बताएं पहले पहले आप
नहीं
बताएं
नहीं, सही है, जो मैंने
ऑथेंटिसिटी
बात की
क्या
वो
होती
उसी
है
के हवाले से ही पहले ही मैं कर चुकी हूँ कि ये वो मुझे इसलिए ऑथेंटिक नहीं लगता।
हाँ
तो जब वो ऑथेंटिक नहीं है, अगर आप ट्रेन स्पॉटिंग देखते हैं, अगर मतलब आप ये डेरी गर्ल्स देख लें,
या डेरी गर्ल्स इज वेरी फनी
या
या
दैट्स लाइक, क्यों है वो इतनी ऑथेंटिसिटी है, क्योंकि जिन्होंने भी लिखा है जो भी वो करे, पंचायत आप देख लें अगर आपने
हम्म
इंडियन शोज वगैरह में से, भाई क्योंकि या काफी हद तक ये जो यार ये जो किरण राव की जो फिल्म है लापता लेडीज, सो
आई सॉ दैट लास्ट वीक एंड एंजॉयड इट
राइट राइट, सो माय थिंग इज दैट इंडिया में क्योंकि आपको रूरल बैकग्राउंड से भी इंडिया में छोटे शहर एग्जिस्ट करते हैं, टीयर 2 सिटी का कॉन्सेप्ट है, टीयर 3 सिटी का कॉन्सेप्ट है, हमारे पास 2 शहर हैं, ठीक है, उनमें सारे जो हैं जो पढ़े लिखे हैं वो गेटेड कम्युनिटीज में बैठे हुए हैं, ठीक है, उनसे हम कैसे क्रिएटिविटी की तवक्को करें, और जो नहीं है, जो फरहत इश्तियाक वगैरह टाइप के हैं, वो जो हैं वो उनकी अपनी एक जहन की गेटेडनेस है क्लियरली, तो ये नहीं, वो सिर्फ हमारे पास ये 2 बबल्स हैं, और कोई जब एक ऑर्गेनिक पंपिंग शहर ही नहीं है, कोई आपस में इंगेजमेंट ही नहीं है, हर कोई जो या एक अंग्रेजी के बबल की दुनिया है, या फिर ये इस्लाम के, या कंजर्वेटिव कह लें उसको, आप इस्लाम ना भी कहें तो एक पाकिस्तान का जो स्टेट डेफिनेशन की जो पाकिस्तानियत है, या जो कल्चरल की है वो है, तो मतलब देयर इज नो रियल हार्ट इन दी स्टोरीज, और truth or authenticity in these stories, because there is no real mixing of people.
I'm going to read you this prized possession of mine that I was telling you about a little while ago. It's a publication from the Pakistan Academy of Letters, which was a state-funded project to
Okay,
create a Pakistan identity.
right.
And this is the first issue of this publication. It's from 1992,
Okay.
and it's called Pakistani Literature. और उसका blurb है Pakistani literature preceded the emergence of the state by many centuries. Its early development took place in a highly cosmopolitan atmosphere which had emerged after the arrivals of the Muslims in the subcontinent. The interaction of Islamic civilization with the local traditions gave birth to a unique synthesis of historic importance. Pakistani literature is a product of this organic development. अब इसमें जो पाकिस्तानी राइटिंग फीचर हुई है as part of this official state identity creation
जी.
project from the year
Mhm.
1992 is Punjabi, Urdu, Pashto, Hindi, Balochi, and English. I've noticed that English में लिखने वालों के लिए आपके पास खासा ज्यादा प्यार नहीं है which is understandable but
Too bad when
English is
somebody
a
says,
Pakistani language as well.
yeah, sure. I mean, why not? मेरी बहुत complicated relationship है with English.
I'm लग
और
रहा है can we
yeah,
interrogate that a little bit?
sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, देखो यार,
Why?
I think it has a lot to do with my family background. And that is basically, that both my parents are PhDs in Urdu, and
Hmm.
both of them are Punjabi speaking. And like my mother is Punjabi, as in like उनकी तो सारा मतलब सात पुश्ते हैं पंजाबी हैं, मगर or whatever, like you know वहीं पे रहे हैं वो, मगर my dad's family is from Kashmir and then came to Amritsar and then upon partition Lahore and Jung. But anyway, so my thing is that, you know, with my mother in particular, you know, she had an immense complex about her lack of English.
Hmm.
So, you know, so she really wanted to send her kids to English medium schools and, you know, all of that. And she managed and वो सारा कुछ कर लिया जो I guess उनके ज़हन में होगा कि बच्चों को बनाना चाहिए. लेकिन, you know, that has left a huge, I suppose, impression on me when I'm like, what is the big deal?
Hmm.
Right? And, you know, एक किस्म का एक उसका रिएक्शन है कह लें. एंड
Yeah.
सो मुझे एक तो खैर ये मुझे वजह बहुत बड़ी एक लगती है.
Hmm.
और उसके अलावा लेकिन मुझे ये भी लगता है कि अंग्रेजी ठीक है, जाहिर है कि अहम इस तरह से हमारे लिए है कि वो हमें जोड़ती है बहुत से ऐसे ख्यालात के साथ भी, इम्पल्सेस के साथ भी, जो यू नो यूनिवर्सलिस्ट हैं, ग्लोबलिस्ट हैं, जो कि मैं यकीन भी रखती हूँ. लेकिन मैं समझती हूँ कि अंग्रेजी एक बहुत बड़ा मसला भी है हमारे यहाँ. And I personally think that, you know, because of engaging mostly in English, Pakistanis, by the virtue of the creation of Pakistan, obviously they are uprooted from themselves, you know, or from their land.
Hmm.
English adds to it in ways that, like, it may also add to India's identity crisis, but India at least has something because of the fact that it's not uprooted from its past. I mean, you know, it can at least have both things together. मुझे लगता है कि हमारे यहाँ हम अपनी सॉइल से, इंडिया वो सॉइल अगर है तो उससे अप्रूट हो गए हैं, और हमारे पास एक तरफ रह गई है यू नो रिलीजन, और एक तरफ रह गई अंग्रेजी. और यू नो, और वो अब उसका भी मिलाप हो गया, यू नो, जैसे आपने हमारा मकसूद का इंटरव्यू किया और मैंने कल वो
जी.
सुना था पॉडकास्ट, बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग, आई लव हमारा मकसूद वर्क. एंड सो यू नो, वो जो है, अब क्या है कि अब वो मिलाप हो गया अंग्रेजी और इस्लाम का भी. तो अब वो जो इस वक्त जो नए बर्गर हैं वो अब इस्लामी भी हैं और वो अंग्रेज भी हैं. तो
मैम, बर्गर
कमाल.
बर्गर की बात होती है. आई मीन नॉट एवरी बर्गर इज
वही
इस्लामी.
मतलब मैं ऑब्वियसली एक जो पल्स जो देखती हूँ, ओवरऑल ज़ाइटगाइस्ट की बात, जो जाहिर है हर टाइप
हाँ.
का इंसान है. मगर यू नो व्हाट इज द होल, आई अगेन नॉट एट ऑल टू डिसमिस व्हाट्स यू नो हैपनिंग, यू नो, बिल्कुल मैं ये नहीं मेरा मकसद. लेकिन
Hmm.
you know, the example of Palestine to me is afraid emblematic of that, कि वो बर्गर और इस्लाम का जो कॉम्बिनेशन है वो ये है कि आपको अपने बारे में आपकी आंखें बंद हैं, यू आर ब्लाइंडेड टू एनीथिंग अराउंड यू, बिकॉज एक अंग्रेजी ने आपको सारा दिन आप अंग्रेजी लिटरेचर पढ़ते हैं. रोज मैं जो भी इंस्टाग्राम पे जो बुक अकाउंट्स हैं या कोई और हैं, जो भी एडिटर्स हैं अंग्रेजी वाले जो भी हैं, वो सारा दिन ये देख रहे हैं कि ये अंग्रेज कौन क्या लिख रहा है. ठीक है, आपको कुछ नहीं पता कि आपके इर्द गिर्द क्या हो रहा है, क्योंकि अब आप बिकॉज ऑफ सोशल मीडिया की दुनिया में भी जहां पर आप देख रहे हैं और जो भी कुछ कर रहे हैं, तो अब आपका ग्लोबल लेफ्ट से आपका सारा जो है वो इनपुट हो रहा है अंग्रेजी के अंदर. सो नाउ यू आर immersed in the um, worlds of you know, people who are speaking in English in the
Hmm.
US, or largely in the US, I would say, and whose interests are based in that country. But now you are feeling that you are rebelling against some larger global structure while completely ignoring your geography. And I think for me, perhaps, you know, अंग्रेजी का सबसे बड़ा मसला ये है कि आपको वो पहले ही पाकिस्तान अपने वेरियस वजहों की बिना पर अपरूटेड अपनी ज्योग्राफी से, और अंग्रेजी उसको मजीद अपरूट कर देती है. एंड दैट आई थिंक इज प्रोबेबली माय इशू.
I understand and respect both of those positions. I wonder if we could also, though, acknowledge that there are different strands of Pakistani English language writing. You know, you can look at Pakistani English language writing from the perspective of the outside in and
Mm-hmm.
either see and acknowledge and talk about only those who have been published out of the US or the UK and
Right,
Europe and are
right.
reviewed and covered there.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also acknowledge that there is a whole indigenous strand of writing, which grew out of
Right.
people, the lives of writers who do not come from privileged
Mhm.
backgrounds where, unke baap, dada, aunts, uncles, etc.
Right.
were part of the colonial administration. And that
Right.
is why they had
बिल्कुल.
exposure to all this stuff and they traveled a
Yeah.
lot and they had libraries. I mean, there are writers like Faika Mansab, Musharraf Ali
Mhm. Right.
Faruqi,
Right.
Usman Malik,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sara Nareed. This is
I've
all
read the
indigenous
first two.
Pakistani English
I
language
mean,
writing.
I've read Musharraf.
राइट
Yeah.
और हाँ और हमारे जो encounters अंग्रेजी जबान से हैं वो शायद उन चीज़ों से इतने नहीं इन्फ्लुएंस हुए जितने
Right.
और लोग हैं and so
सही.
to when you sort of to dismiss all Pakistani writing as being, and I know that you don't intend to, let me
Mm.
say that I
No, no, no.
appreciate that.
I
I think
really
that it
appreciate this
हाँ
feedback in a positive sort of environment
yeah,
because वो Twitter पे ये होता है कि सिर्फ और सिर्फ गालियां शुरू हो जाती है. You know, you can't
हाँ
really
नहीं
actually have a conversation.
गालियों की
So
कोई
this,
जरूरत नहीं है. I mean,
yeah, yeah. I
गाली
mean,
is the
as in
the
like bad blood वाला हो जाता है. So it's
हाँ
really good for me to be able to listen to something like this, like in this environment. Anyway, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, and it's a really rich and fertile time for writers like that as well. और सबसे
Right.
मजे की बात उसमें, and this goes back to your work actually, which is that the
Mhm.
similarities between India and Pakistan and the shared cultural heritage. So my
Right.
work, for example, has only been published in India, by the way.
Yeah.
लेकिन मेरे मेरे जैसे और बहुत सारे लोग हैं जिस
Right.
प्लेटफॉर्म पे ये पॉडकास्ट होस्ट होती है, लकीर, आप उस पे देख लें.
Yeah. बिल्कुल सही.
So I think it's just important for me that the nuance and the depth of our living culture
Right.
not be sidelined
तो
because
अब मेरा
of
आपसे एक
हाँ
सवाल है.
हम्म
तो वो ये है कि बिल्कुल आई 100% एग्री. ना ही मैं समझती हूँ कि जो लिख रहा है मतलब पर्सनली उसको डिस्करेज करने का कोई मकसद है. और मैं बहुत सा पढ़ती भी हूँ अंग्रेजी का, पाकिस्तान से भी जो आता है जो मुझे बहुत पसंद भी है. राइट.
हम्म
एंड सो आई एब्सोल्युटली agree with you. English is indeed also a Pakistani language,
हम्म
right? That I am not denying, but I also feel that क्योंकि एक ओवरवेलमिंगली जो एजुकेटेड हमारा तबका है अब, क्योंकि वो प्राइवेट स्कूलों में एजुकेट होता है, उसके पास अपने आप को एक्सप्रेस करने के लिए और कोई जबान बची भी नहीं है. और
हम्म
हायर लेवल पे अगर एक्सप्रेस करना है तो बिल्कुल ही नहीं बची. तो उसका मुझे ये बहरहाल ये लगता है क्योंकि देर इज डेफिनेटली आई फील प्राइवेट इंग्लिश मीडियम एजुकेटेड पाकिस्तान एंड द रेस्ट. तो मुझे ये लगता है कि नेवर द ट्वेन शेल मीट वाला काफी हद तक ये ना एक तरफ पाकिस्तानी ड्रामा है और
हम्म
और दूसरी तरफ एक वो बच्चा है जो कि उससे शायद आवाजार भी हो और फिर उसके पास कोई ऑप्शन नहीं है. राइट. और मेरा प्रॉब्लम ये भी है कि मैं अनलाइक अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल मैं इस स्पेस में एग्जिस्ट भी करती हूँ. लाइक आप जो है आपके जो एक फ्रेटर्निटी है मेरी है वो मेरी एक्चुअली वही लोग. आई मीन आपने जिन लोगों के नाम लिए, फाइका मनसब हो गई, मुशर्रफ अली फारूकी हो गए वगैरह, दीज आर पीपल आई नो.
हम्म
राइट. अब मैं किसी पाकिस्तानी राइटर को पढ़ती हूँ, हाफ द टाइम आई नो देम पर्सनली. Right.
हम्म
So these are the people. I mean, because I personally know I don't like the idea of sort of dismissing ek to their work at a personal level even, but even at
हम्म
a general level. But I do feel unfortunately कि जितना ज्यादा हम हमारा पढ़ा लिखा तबका है वो कट ऑफ होता जाता है और अंग्रेजी मेरे लिए उसका एक सिंबल है.
सही.
या.
तो इस पे एक और सवाल उठता है. Is it possible that the reason so many people are now choosing to express themselves creatively and politically in English is that it's simply safer to do so? Because
राइट.
अगर आप उर्दू में करें या सराइकी में करें या पश्तो में करें,
राइट.
आपको कोई उठा के मार देगा.
जी हाँ.
और
नहीं
because
बिल्कुल.
तो ये भी बात है. और
जी
दूसरी
हाँ.
बात ये जो this the formation of this echo chamber is
या.
not the first time this has happened in Pakistan. I mean, actually, the whole idea of Pakistani adab has come out of an echo
राइट.
chamber, an elitist echo chamber, which was the
बिल्कुल.
Ashrafia and
बिल्कुल सही
the elite
है.
Urdu speaking population. तो
एग्जैक्टली.
मुझे फिर ये भी अजीब लगता है कि जब वो लोग कर रहे थे तो ठीक था, अब
नहीं
हम
हम तो
इंग्लिश में
उसको भी
कर रहे हैं
कहते हैं कि
तो
ठीक नहीं
मसला
है.
है. आई मीन सो आई मीन
वही
मेरी
मैं
जो
कह रहा, हम तो उसको भी कहते
हाँ
हैं ठीक नहीं है. और उर्दू इन
या
इटसेल्फ ऑब्वियसली जैसे आपने कहा कि इस्तेमाल हुई इन चीज़ों के लिए, लेकिन ऐसा भी है कि नहीं भी है. उर्दू का भी एक बहुत
हम्म
डाइवर्स है आउटपुट. तो
Yes, and Urdu is in a very exciting place for now. I mean, I think another thing that you and I share is an interest in rappers out of Karachi.
हाँ,
राइट।
बिल्कुल,
और
या
जैसे तला अंजुम का काम आप
जी
देखें,
जी
और
जी
अभी
जी
आई
बिल्कुल।
वाज वाचिंग गाने की कहानी, एंड देयर वाज
हम्म,
अनदर रैपर जिसका गाना मैंने पहले नहीं सुना था, अलीम समथिंग।
जी जी, अली मार के।
या सो दे आल्सो हैव दीस बिट्स ऑफ इंग्लिश इन देयर, राइट?
या एब्सोल्युटली। हाँ, देखिए मिंग्लिश तो अब हमारी ज़बान है, राइट?
या
ये तो ख़ैर अनडिनायबल है कि मिंग्लिश ही अब बोलती है। देयर इज़ नो सच थिंग एज़ लाइक एनीबॉडी हू इज़ एबल टू स्पीक एनी व्हाटएवर इन क्वोट्स प्योर लैंग्वेज। तो वो तो ख़ैर एब्सोल्युटली मैं तो बोल ही नहीं सकती, मैं तो एक जुमला नहीं बोल सकती किसी एक ज़बान में। मैं पूरी तरह ना, अगर मैं आपसे जब आम गुफ्तगू कर रही हूँ तो मेरे लिए मुमकिन ही नहीं है। मैं अंग्रेजी भी मेरे लिए एक्चुअली बोलना काफ़ी दुश्वार रहती है, क्योंकि मुझे वहाँ पर भी जो है वो कांस्टेंट ज़रूरत महसूस होती है कि मैं उर्दू या पंजाबी का लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल करूँ। इसलिए मैं बहुत खुश होती हूँ कि यार मेरा जो ख़ामंद है वो तीनों ज़बानें समझता है, जो मैं समझती हूँ, क्योंकि मेरे लिए अपने आप को जेन्युइन एक्सप्रेशन वही है, उन ज़बानों तीनों ज़बानों का मिक्स। तो वो तो एक एक अनडिनायबल फैक्ट है। लेकिन वो मैं समझती हूँ कि हाँ, फिर वो जो ज़बान है जो कि इस वक़्त बन रही है, उर्दू है, उर्दू का तो हेरिटेज ही ये है कि वो है ही एक मिक्स ज़बान, और वो उन्हीं ज़बानों के से वो जो फीडर ज़बानें हैं उसकी उसको लेकर वो आगे चलती है। तो अभी भी वही हो रहा है, अंग्रेज़ी जो है वो फीडर ज़बान है जो पहले पर्शियन थी। तो वो तो ठीक है, लेकिन फिर वो जो इस वक़्त आम इंसान की ज़बान है, ये बड़ा एक मेरे लिए बहुत बड़ा मैं सवाल है कि वो जो है वो कैसे कैप्चर की जाए। और मुझे ये लगता है कि वो विजुअल मीडियम में कैप्चर करना फिर भी मुमकिन है, इस वक्त
हम्म।
प्रिंट मीडियम में कैप्चर करना मुश्किल है। मैं सिर्फ ये कह रही हूँ कि एक हमारा, जब तक ऐसा नहीं होगा कि ऑगमेंटेशन वाइडर एक ऐसी राइटिंग के साथ नहीं होगी जो कि लोकल हो, तो ये हमारे ऊपर ज्यादा हैवी वे करना शुरू हो जाता
There are two ways again of looking at this situation as well, that you
है।
can put the onus of the situation on the person, the creative person, the writer, the
Mhm.
artist, the
Right,
singer, or you
right,
can put it on the entities and the establishment that throttles
mm,
creativity and has throttled it mercilessly in
right.
pursuit of a bigger agenda since the moment Pakistan was created.
Sahi. Yeah, that's also true. Absolutely, that's true. But again, in that regard as well, I feel like the Pakistani establishment has, or the creation of Pakistan. I wouldn't say the Pakistani establishment. I think the very creation of Pakistan has orphaned us from everything, literally. But I would say that फिर उसके बाद it's the whole global thing. It's also the fact that because हम अपनी जमीन से ऑर्फन हो गए, तो अब हमारे पास और रह ही क्या गया, हमारे पास फिर बाहर ही देखना है हमने। So we are
लेकिन
like,
अपनी जमीन, हमारी जमीन है कहाँ? I mean, क्या क्या
right,
जमीन? Can a person really ever
जमीन
even
जहां पे
belong
ही
to
आप खड़े
anything?
हैं यार,
हाँ।
आपका शहर तो हो सकती है ना आपकी जमीन, आपका आपका इर्द गिर्द तो हो सकता है ना, इमीडिएट इर्द गिर्द। ये कंट्री शंट्री तो ऑब्वियसली ये तो बहुत ही फिजूल एक मतलब बहुत ही बकवास और आर्बिट्ररी आइडिया है। खासतौर पे
हम्म।
जहाँ पे आपने इतने डिस्पैरेट लोगों का एक, दैट इज व्हाई अगेन द एटलीस्ट द आइडिया ऑफ समथिंग लाइक इंडिया अक्लमंदों ने बनाया हुआ है, वो ये है कि यूनिटी इन डाइवर्सिटी। ठीक है,
हम्म।
तो कम से कम आप इंडियन होते हुए ये कह सकते हैं कि मैं ठीक है, मैं इंडियन हूँ, लेकिन असल में तो मैं, और आप इंडियंस को मिलते हैं ऑब्वियसली, इंडिया से ज्यादा डाइवर्स तो दुनिया में शायद कोई मुल्क नहीं है। तो लेकिन वो फिर भी एक इंडियन आइडेंटिटी में भी अपने आप को कुछ हद तक समझ सकते हैं, चाहे नॉर्थ साउथ की कितनी भी लड़ाई हो, लेकिन अपनी आइडेंटिटीज भी मेंटेन कर सकते हैं। हमारी तो जो आइडेंटिटी की फाउंडेशन है वो अपनी आइडेंटिटी को निगेट करने में है ना। तो या जो भी अपनी अगर एथनिक आइडेंटिटी है, या अगर वो वैरायटी ऑफ आइडेंटिटी भी है, तो हाँ, जमीन बहरहाल, यार देखो जमीन बहरहाल होती है एक चीज, इसलिए इसीलिए मैं ये कह रही हूँ कि जो ओवरसीज वाली जो आपने बात की थी पहले, यू नो
हम्म।
बीइंग डिवोर्स्ड फ्रॉम योर ज्योग्राफी is is a violent thing, right? And that is why partition was also beyond the actual violence, the उसका जो बाकी fallout है वो कितना violent है, because you are being
हम्म।
divorced from where you physically belonged for a long time and understood.
हम्म।
तो इसलिए हाँ, अपनी जगह अपनी जमीन एक चीज है for me, like then I at least do root myself in Lahore's history, for instance. Like I have been reading a lot on Lahore lately, and
हम्म।
I feel that that helps me feel grounded in some way. इन ओके मतलब प्री पार्टीशन लाहौर के बारे में पढ़ने से एक्चुअली खौफनाक भी बहुत एक उसका असर है मेरे ऊपर, क्योंकि आई एम लाइक बहुत, you know, when you read about, and this video that you mentioned, the one about like Indians from Pakistan that I just you know, the reel that I made, um it stems from me being deeply immersed these days in you know, this kind of pre-partition history, and the
Yeah.
fact that, you know, अच्छा यार मेरे शहर में ये था लाहौर, ये, and try to, you know, sort of imagine it, and you know, and get your mind blown by it all. So yeah, I don't know मैं कहाँ से कहाँ पहुँच गई हूँ और आप
No,
क्या
I,
कह
I
रही
I hear you. I hear you. My
Yeah.
father was 17 or 18 at the time that partition
Oh.
happened, right? So my father was
Mhm.
Indian. My mother
No.
was born before partition in Baramulla, Kashmir, and fled as a
Mm.
refugee. And
Mm.
eventually their family
Oh
made it
wow.
down.
Is that when the Baramulla killings happened in 1948?
Yes.
Oh
Yep.
wow.
And
Okay.
they were actually they were Christian, and
Yes, of
so they
course.
were
Yeah.
stopped and they were about to be slaughtered. But because
Oh.
my nana actually converted from
Mm-hmm.
uh, Islam to
Okay.
Christianity, so he could go
Okay.
to a missionary school, which
Mm-hmm.
obviously did not go down well with his extended family.
Right.
उनको
Right.
कलमा आता था और उन्होंने बहुत
Mm-hmm.
जल्दी से सब बाकियों को सिखा
Oh.
दिया.
Right.
They pretended to be Muslim to survive. Um,
Right. हाँ, अब आपने
तो
ये जो बात की है, I'm sorry, I'm
और
not, I don't want
मेरे जो
to. Yeah.
वालिद साहब थे उनका जो घर है,
Mm-hmm.
they had Hindu
Oh,
neighbors, and for the
right.
first year every week they would come back,
Oh, wow.
and they thought कि नहीं अब ठीक हो जाएंगी चीजें.
Right. Oh,
uh,
yeah.
so the sort of stories that
Yeah. ये देखिए ना जो आप बता रही हैं, आप कितनी कमाल, ये इंटरेस्टिंग में, एंड देयर व्हाट यू आर सेइंग comes in कि भी पाकिस्तानी एस्टेब्लिशमेंट वाला फैक्टर, एंड मेरी थिंग कम्स इन कि अंग्रेजी में करना. अब आपकी कितनी कमाल, कितनी इंटरेस्टिंग बात है. अब यही मुझे लगता है कि मेन स्ट्रीम में एक आम फहम जबान में ये बातें हमारे लिए कहना भी मुश्किल है, you know, इनको सामने आना भी मुश्किल है. There are so many people who are doing their thing, और कोई जो अंग्रेजी में कर रहा है और you know, अपने तरीकों से कर रहा है. जरूर किसी की ड्यूटी तो नहीं है ना कि पाकिस्तान को बेहतर करने की या उस चीज को you know, वो हर एक का अपना मकसद है. एंड अब उससे क्या पाकिस्तान बदल जाएगा या हमारी इर्द गिर्द के लोग दुनिया बदल नहीं, उससे एक दिन में तो कुछ भी नहीं होगा.
yeah, it absolutely doesn't matter. I mean, one should not go into something thinking कि मुझे इसमें से क्या मिलेगा. That's not
बिल्कुल.
and at the end of the day there's only really one way in which people are different. There are only two states of being: either you're alive or you're dead. Everything else is an
सही
extra.
बात.
That's my approach. But मेरे ख्याल में हमने एक तो बहुत सारा time English language writing पे waste कर लिया, which is the problem with English language writing. और दूसरा पाकिस्तान का मसला कभी हल नहीं होगा because
Of
that's just the
course.
nature of the beast. Can you talk to me about, a little bit about saris? Because I have noticed recently that there has been a reclamation.
Mhm.
So this happens, I think every generation discovers suddenly
Yeah.
that the previous generation was human.
Yeah.
And they feel compelled to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's been happening with the sari. And you've
Right.
stepped in. And
Mhm.
that there are two things I really admire about you. One is your willingness to step in when you see that something is being lost and say, no, excuse me, ye bhi hua tha.
Right.
And I think two instances where you did that was with the sari and with Ziaul Haq.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Ziaul Haq तो खैर मेरा pet project है, as you may have realized by now. But because I feel कि वो बहुत easy सा narrative बना दिया गया है through, you know, English newspapers again. Because I understand कि जिन लोगों ने वो बनाया उन्होंने भुट्टो का दौर भी देखा था और फिर उन्होंने ज़िया का देखा, and they're like, you know, से virulently opposed to, and very very rightly so, जो कुछ उन्होंने देखा, fully I understand that. But I also feel that a lot of them sort of disengaged from popular culture because they were like in their maybe, you know, mid to late 20s or something at that point in time, and you know, they created a narrative for future generations that was unfortunately fairly lopsided, because Bahral, you know, unhone almost, you know, false. So I really really want to talk about Zia because of the fact, not because I have any interest in absolving Zia, but because I feel that by putting the blame on Zia, you are taking away from the fact that this is Pakistan, it's not Zia. सो
Hmm.
आप बहुत कन्वीनियंटली जो है वो पाक नेशनलिस्ट भी बन गए हैं अब इन योर ओल्डर एज। आप उस किस्म की सारी बातें करते हैं वट एवर, आई अंडरस्टैंड व्हाई यू डू इट, बिकॉज यू लिव इन पाकिस्तान, आपका वहाँ पे स्टेक्स हैं, आप चाहते हैं कि वो बेहतर हो, तो ऑब्वियसली आप एंटी पाकिस्तान या ये कि उसकी फाउंडेशन को ही क्वेश्चन करना शुरू कर देंगे, तो फिर कहाँ जाएंगे उसके बाद। सो यू नो आई अंडरस्टैंड देयर प्रॉब्लम, but I also understand my problem, which is that you need to speak the truth. एंड वो प्रॉब्लम ये है कि ज़िया ने आके पाकिस्तान को पाकिस्तानी बनाया, पाकिस्तान पाकिस्तान ही था पहले दिन से।
Hmm.
So therefore there is that, and there's also the thing that it eventually became what it became because of a lot of different forces of again back to Mara Maqsood, global forces, वगैरह वगैरह. It's not simply just this one thing.
Hmm.
About the sari, again, because मुझे ये होती है तकलीफ के you can have a certain narrative, whatever, you can have it, but based on truth, not falsehood. So साड़ी वाला भी वही बात है कि बहुत सा ये एक्चुअल पब्लिश्ड चीजें मैंने देखी जो कि इनकी कोई फैक्ट चेकिंग नहीं थी, कुछ नहीं थी, भाई नहीं थी साड़ी बैंड. Even this idea was prevalent, I feel, although that video does not have like that many views. So मैं ये नहीं कह रही कि उस वीडियो ने कोई चेंज कर दिया कोई नैरेटिव, लेकिन एटलीस्ट कुछ लोगों के जहन में शायद कुछ मैंने तब्दीली देखी है. वरना पीपल यूज्ड टू से थिंग्स लाइक जो दुपट्टा पॉलिसी थी ड्रामों की, वो ज़िया के दौर में थी, वो नहीं थी ज़िया के दौर में, वो एक्चुअली नवाज शरीफ
Hmm.
के पहले दौर में थी. तो आप जब हर चीज फिर वो एक ऐसा वो बीस्ट बन जाता है कि हर कोई जो है वो दिस people stop thinking and then they're just like
Yeah.
वो नैरेटिव के साथ बह रहे हैं बस. तो मेरा ये पर्सनल ख्याल है कि things changed for the worse, if so indeed, although I don't think कि कोई linear worse और better है. अभी इस वक्त भी जो पाकिस्तान है वो कितने तरीकों से it's way more progressive, let's say, than what it was when I was younger.
So there's a writer I admire greatly. She's an
Mm-hmm.
English writer, Rachel
Mm-hmm.
Cusk, and in an
Uh-huh.
interview she said the problems of writing are the problems of living. And I've increasingly come to see the wisdom behind that. And I wonder if our the shortcomings of the art that we produce are
Mm-hmm.
informed by our life
Wow.
experiences. तो ये जो
Amazing.
PTV वाले source ने मुझे
Mm-hmm.
जो चीजें
Yeah.
कही yesterday, one of the things was that in terms of exposition, that you have to understand that our audience is so used to being told through dictatorship or authoritarianism. We are so used to being told things that if someone is not telling us something, we think it's crap. So
यार मैं तो
that's now
बहुत
become our
डिसएग्री
default
करती हूँ,
storytelling.
लेकिन ये मैं बिल्कुल डिसएग्री करती हूँ. इतना हमारे लोगों ने, हमारे क्रिएटिव्स ने इतनी इजीली हर चीज पाम ऑफ कर दी है टू डिक्टेटरशिप्स, टू एस्टैब्लिशमेंट, व्हाटएवर. उन्हीं डिक्टेटरशिप्स के अंडर लोग जो हैं वो इंतहाई सटल चीजें करके जो है उन्हीं डिक्टेटरशिप्स को का मजाक उड़ा रहे थे. आप क्या बात करें यार. द बेस्ट वर्क, हालांकि उसका बाद में इतना बुरा काम है, लेकिन अनवर मकसूद का इतना इतना अच्छा काम भी है अंडर द डिक्टेटरशिप, जो कि
Mm,
इतना सटल है. क्योंकि आप सटल हुए बगैर रह ही नहीं सकते थे. डिक्टेटरशिप, ईरान नहीं है डिक्टेटरशिप के अंडर ऑफ सॉर्ट. तो आप
mm,
जो हैं उन्होंने उसी वजह से अपनी सटल एक्सप्रेशन डेवलप किए, क्योंकि आप डायरेक्टली कह ही नहीं सकते, लेकिन उन्होंने कहा है ना इन दोज वेज. तो मैं बिल्कुल अग्री नहीं करती ये अपनी जो है वो लैक को किसी और के ऊपर डाल देना. मैं पर्सनली अगर मैं कुछ नहीं लिख सकती, मैं एक चीज लिखने की कोशिश कर रही हूँ, मेरे में
mm,
एबिलिटी नहीं है, मैंने नोट किया कि मेरे में एबिलिटी नहीं है. तो अब मैं ये कहूँ कि मेरे में एबिलिटी इसलिए नहीं है क्योंकि मैं पाकिस्तान में पली बड़ी थी, फलाना फलाना, हो सकता है इसकी वजह ये हो, लेकिन you can't blame it on others all the time. You just can't. Like, if you want to do something, if you have the capacity to do something, you'll do it and you will be able to do it. ये हमारे यहाँ बहुत easy route लोगों ने, हमारे creators ने खास तौर पे find कर लिया कि वो फारिस शफी बना सकता है वो गाने जो वो बना रहा है. He's amazing because although
yeah,
मुझे ये नहीं कि मैं उस टाइप की हूँ, मैंने कई चीजें मुझे उसकी बुरी भी लगती हैं whatever, लेकिन मैं कहती हूँ कमाल है भाई, क्या टैलेंट, पता
वाकई,
लगता है ना कि टैलेंट है, राइट.
yeah,
तो आप ये ना कहें कि भाई तो फारिस अभी भी उसी डिक्टेटरशिप के अंडर से निकला है ना. या उन्हीं चीजों के अंडर से निकला है, तो बल्कि उन्हीं को क्रिटिक कर रहा है, क्योंकि बल्कि आपके पास तो फर्टाइल ग्राउंड है कि आप कर सकते हैं। तो ये बातें मैं नहीं मानती, बिल्कुल भी नहीं मैं एक सेकंड के लिए मैं तैयार नहीं हूँ ये मानने के लिए कि आप कोई स्पेशल स्टूपिड हैं या कुछ ऐसा है, ये नहीं।
Special stupid.
आप
Yeah. Sabahat, when are you writing a book in English?
actually, interestingly, quite some years ago now, I think तो 4 साल हो गए हैं, I actually got a book deal because I wanted one. I pitched it to write a book in English, to write about single women in Pakistan, non-fiction. Um, उसके बाद, immediately after that, I moved to the US. और फिर वही जो मेरे हैं कि मैं अब बहुत फिर अपने आप को क्वेश्चन करना शुरू कर देती हूँ कि भी am I the right person for this, why am I doing this, whatever ever. एंड तो मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा एग्जिस्टेंशियल क्राइसिस हो गया। एक तो मुझे हुआ कि मैं अंग्रेजी में लिखना ही क्यों चाहती हूँ जब मैं ये सारी चीज़ें सोचती हूँ अंग्रेजी के हवाले से। तो एक तो मुझे ये हो गया, दूसरा मुझे ये हुआ कि अब तो मैं हुई नहीं डिवोर्स्ड, तो मैं हाउ कैन आई स्पीक फॉर सिंगल women. Although I wasn't speaking for them to begin with, that was not the idea of the book. But even then I felt कि मैं एक और स्पेस में मूव कर गई हूँ और मैं अब जो हूँ ऑथेंटिक नहीं है मेरा जो ये सब कुछ है। तो जहाँ पे मुझे अपनी ऑथेंटिसिटी अपनी भी नहीं लगने लगती, मैं वहाँ पे जो हूँ ना, मुझसे होता नहीं फिर। तो मैंने नहीं किया। तो या सो बुक का तो या ये है आंसर के आई थिंक के अल्टीमेटली मैंने जो रियलाइज किया है कि मैं किताब, अगर ट्रेडिशनल मीडिया फॉर्मेट की बात है तो शायद मैं किताब नहीं लिखना चाहती अल्टीमेटली। लेकिन जो मैं करना चाहती हूँ, मैं एक नहीं, एक से ज्यादा, मैं मतलब मैं विजुअल मीडियम में मेरे ज़हन में हैं चीजें जो मैं करना चाहती हूँ। एक सीरीज बनाना चाहती हूँ, 2-3 फिल्में बनाना चाहती हूँ, मेरे ज़हन में जो है आइडियाज।
I think you should
लेकिन
do it and it will be fantastic. Sabahat, I am going to let you go now. You've given me so
थैंक
much to
यू
think
सुजाना।
about, and this was such a pleasure.
सेम
And
सेम।
thank you so much.
थैंक
Bye.
यू ना, बाय।